This is an introduction to Chapter 2, The Principles of Science and Systems. Science is a way of thinking, not the only way, but a disciplined approach to problem solving based on evidence and facts, which is repeatable and hopefully predictable. As Biology 120 is a science class, we should understand how that scientific thinking proceeds. There are other ways of thinking where it depends on your opinion or belief system, but we will use the scientific approach. There are a number of steps involved in the scientific method. I am confident that you have gone through these steps even without knowing it. Think about arriving home to see a nicely wrapped present sitting on the table. I would suggest that you go through these scientific steps. 1, you make an observation. There is a wrapped present there. 2, you ask a question. Who is it for? What might be in it? 3, if it is close to your birthday, you might suspect that it is for you, so you make an educated guess and propose a hypothesis. A hypothesis is a tentative and testable potential answer. Then you gather your data. You might look for a name on a tag. You might lift and shake it to determine what potentially could be in it. You take this data, you interpret this data, and weigh it against your tentative hypothesis. If it supports your hypothesis, you might test it further. But if it does not support your hypothesis, like somebody else's name is on the tag, you have to go back and change your hypothesis and test for a new hypothesis. That's an important part of science, is that you have to be able to be malleable. You have to be able to change what you think is the right answer based on the data. If you think that you have an answer, you might share that with others for their evaluation and input. In real science, your data and conclusions are then evaluated by peers, and if they think that you have something that is valid, they will encourage you to publish that. We see in this diagram that there are basic principles of science. Science wants to be based on observation and testing. So as much with measurement and quantification as possible. That's called imperialism. As you see, science looks for patterns that are uniform or the same across time and space. That's called uniformitarianism. If there are multiple potential explanations, then what we normally try to do is to pick the one that is the simpler one. That's called parsimony. So always try to go with the simpler explanation. If new data or evidence appears, science must change their explanation. Science must be testable, it must be falsifiable, and it must be malleable or changeable. Number 5, it needs to be able to be repeated with the same results. It needs to be reliable and be able to be repeated by others in order to see the trends. Science is very elusive, it's always changing, and it needs to be so. Belief systems are not that way. Belief systems, regardless of what data comes in, people continue to hold their beliefs. So we need to be able to see that science is testable, potentially falsifiable. If you cannot possibly prove that it's wrong, it's probably not a scientific approach. And it needs to change and adapt. In order to validate science needs to use mathematical methodologies like statistical methods in order to ascertain whether a conclusion is valid or not. So these methods are used to quantify the confidence levels of your data. How likely is it to be random, or is there a predictable thing happening? How do we deal with the outliers, like the number 70 in this graph? How would one go about explaining whether this is a real number or is this some kind of an artifact? And we would use scientific methodologies like statistical testing to determine that. What we often see in populations are extremes on either end, but the vast majority of the population falls someplace in the middle. This is called a bell-shaped curve. This could be height of people in a population. This could be weight of people in a population. This might be grades in a class. So this is an idea of what statistical methodologies will actually help us ascertain. One of the things that science does is that it has peer review. Outsiders evaluate your methodologies, your data, and the conclusions and the statistics that you use to reach those conclusions. We need to be aware that statistics can be manipulated in a variety of ways, and it is important to have broad buy-in by your peer group. In today's environment, with the COVID-19 virus and the race to find appropriate vaccines, it's going to be very, very important to have that tested and validated before we start using it on a large amount of the population. And that testing can take a long time, and so therefore a rush to find vaccines could potentially be dangerous as we go about this. One of the things that we strive for in science in terms of the predictability is that we look to make predictive models. This happens to be a model of global warming, and so we have an awful lot of multidisciplinary scientists looking at this problem and trying to determine whether we can make predictions about what the weather, what the climate might be like in the future, or both near and long term. Besides science, one of the things that we want to look at in this class is we want to look at systems, the interrelationship between various components of the systems. And so this could be looked at in some ways as a productivity or sort of a food system here. What you see is that the sun provides energy that is converted by plants through a process known as photosynthesis into organic carbon molecules. Those plants are fed on by animals like that rabbit. Animals that feed on plants are called herbivores. And then that rabbit might become prey to this fox. The fox is a predator. And so the energy from the sun is passed to the plants, and then to the rabbit, and now to the fox. At some point in time, things pass away. So here we see an example of maybe something happened with this fox, and it's going to decompose. It'll return its minerals back to the earth. The plant will take up those minerals. New sunlight will strike that, and the process goes around again. Most systems are open, which means that they receive input from their surroundings and they produce outputs that leave the system. We have very, very few what are called closed systems. Here's an example in which we have the sunlight coming in to a semi-closed system, but the sunlight is going to ultimately cause the aquatic plants to photosynthesize. The fish is going to be able to use that nutrients. The plants have also produced not only food but oxygen that the fish is going to use. The fish converts that into waste products and carbon dioxide. We have a snail in here that's feeding on some of those waste products and adding to this ecosystem. So as biology students, we need to appreciate the fact that energy passes through plants in the form of photosynthesis, and that we have something called cellular respiration that happens in non-photosynthesizing organisms. And then finally, I want to draw your attention to this, and you have a homework assignment on this baloney detection. One of the most important things I feel that you could get out of this class is learning how to validate claims and ferret out whether information is real or made up. We are inundated with social media. Everybody has an opinion. Everybody has the ability to produce wonderful graphics that make it look like their side of a story is real. And one of the things that students should be able to do is to learn how to detect whether something is real or not. So here, table 2.2 is a series of questions that I'm going to ask you to apply in a homework assignment for baloney detection. Is something real or not real? So I hope that you enjoy chapter 2, and I'm available for questions if you have it. Thank you.